I think you can make great argument for a number of guys to get the 5th spot on the first team. I ultimately elected to go with Jalen Brunson because of looking at that team and looking at, I loved the additions they made before the trading deadline or at the trading deadline. And I thought that if they could stay healthy, they were going to make a real run at the East and at the Celtics and really give them a battle. As it turns out, they never came to fruition, man. They dealt with a lot of injuries. Their second best player is going to miss over 30 games in Julius Randle. Jalen Brunson was completely indefensible. There's nothing you could come up with to get him off his game. He delivered time and time again. He did it efficiently for the most part, carried an offensive burden on a team that rose to second in the Eastern Conference when it was all said and done. I don't know what that team would look like without Jalen Brunson on the floor.
What is up, everybody, and welcome to a very special edition of the All-NBA Show, where we get Tim Legler's All-NBA teams. This is, of course, presented, as always, by DraftKings Sportsbook. Legs, we're going to pick your All-NBA first, second, and third team. How was this exercise for you?
The hardest thing I've ever done in my life. It's like asking me which is my favorite child of the 3 kids I have. It's a really difficult exercise. Although I would come up with a list if you asked me that. It would be about as hard as this was, because obviously you're going to get to some right away that are obvious. I think first teamers, 4 in my opinion, 4 definite first teamers, and then a real debate happens for that 5th spot on the first team, and then after that, all bets are off. You could take the other 15, 20 names I have written down and make great arguments for any of those guys to grab those 10 spots. Yeah. So second and third teams I found to be very difficult. First team, you breeze through those first names, you think this is going to be easy. And then all of a sudden after the 4th name, you go, well, wait a second. And you start thinking about that. That's kind of what I went through. I'm sure you did the same thing.
So things to remember is that this year there is the 65-game rule, which eliminates players like Joel Embiid, who probably could make this list, but he gets eliminated. There's a handful of players that were eliminated, but I really think Embiid was the only one that would have made my list that did not. But I'd
argue Jamal Murray might have an argument for third team, and he's only got 59 games. I think he'd be the other guy.
That's interesting. Well, I'll tell you what, the Nuggets got lucky that he did not hit that mark, because he would have qualified for a Supermax if he would have made an All-NBA team, and Denver would have had 2 Supermax players on their roster. Instead, he comes short of the cutoff, and the rest is history. All right, let's get into the first team here. So you can give me however you want to do this. You can give it to me in the order that you picked them as the most locks. You can go by position, whatever you want here, Legs, but give me the first one.
Yeah, I'll probably, for this first team, I'll probably just go as I wrote them down as immediate obvious answers, and the most obvious in that order. And first, you're obviously going to go with Nikola Jokic, first team, 57-win team in the Western Conference, probably going to be the MVP. Just a typical Jokic year. No question, he's going to be a first-team player. So that was an easy one for me. The next name I wrote down, that was an obvious one, no-brainer, Luka Doncic. I think had the best individual season of any player in the league. His offense generation is incredible, what he did this year between scoring and facilitating. The guy's just a machine, unstoppable offensive force. That was an obvious one. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, that's an obvious to me first teamer, number 1 overall seed in the Western Conference, 57 wins, over 30 points a game. To have number 1 seed in the West with that roster, just still kind of mind blown about that. And as a result, I think he's going to maybe potentially get more first place MVP votes in some people's minds. I've heard a lot of talk over the last couple of weeks of people that I know that are, actually could cast a vote saying, you know what? I don't know. I'm still torn. So I don't think he'll win it, but I think maybe he finishes second. If Luka would be for me, but Shai's right there. Those are the top 3 MVP candidates. Those are clearly the 3 guys that make first team. And now you go to gets a little bit tougher, but I do think one guy that pretty clear in my mind deserves to be on here is Jason Tatum. And there's going to be people that are going to make arguments for other guys because maybe they didn't have as much talent around them. They had more responsibility. Numbers may be a little bit better as a result. I just look at Jason Tatum and I say, wait a second, this is the best player on the team. He's been all league in the past, first team. They won 64 games. They were 14 games better than anybody else in the East. They were a mile better than anybody else in the league in terms of wins. I know that they had a team that was loaded and stacked. His numbers not quite as good. As a result, you share the burden when a team is that good. But I still think this is clearly identified as the best player on the best team in the league. And he plays both ends of the floor. So for me, you got to reward winning on things like this. And so I think Jason Tatum gets my 4th spot. And that point got very cloudy to me. I think you can make a great argument for a number of guys to get the 5th spot on the first team. I ultimately elected to go with Jalen Brunson because of looking at that team and looking at, I loved the additions they made before the trading deadline or at the trading deadline. And I thought that if they could stay healthy, they were going to make a real run at the East and at the Celtics and really give them a battle. As it turns out, they never came to fruition, man. They dealt with a lot of injuries. Their second best player is going to miss over 30 games in Julius Randle. Jalen Brunson was completely indefensible. There's nothing you could come up with to get him off his game. He delivered time and time again. He did it efficiently for the most part, carried an offensive burden on a team that rose to second in the Eastern Conference when it was all said and done. I don't know what that team would look like without Jalen Brunson on the floor, with all the guys they had hurt in and out of lineup all year. So that's why ultimately I go with a guy that had one of the best seasons in the history of that franchise. Jalen Brunson gets my last spot on the first team.
So you're braver than I am, because I really wanted to take Jalen Brunson, and he was the last guy I took off of my personal list. But I like your list. So the first 3, I'm with you there. Those guys are all locks. When you got past there, the guy that I actually was wanting to put Brunson on first team over was actually Jason Tatum. Because to me, and this is my question to you, Giannis and the Bucks had a weird year for a variety of reasons. But Giannis himself had his most efficient season of his career, 62.5% effective field goal percentage, 30.5 points per game, 11.5 rebounds, 6.5 assists. So how did you, when you were going through this, because it sounded like Giannis was not the hard pick there, that you had him on second team. How did you quantify the fact that he's individually putting up really good numbers and looking like he has for each of the last 5 years with the fact that, okay, well, his team has been in turmoil for most of the year? How did you reconcile? Is that the reason he went to second team?
I think 2 reasons. One, I don't think Giannis Antetokounmpo had the impact defensively this year he's had in the past for whatever reason. That was part of it. Secondly, that team was underperformed relative to expectations. And that matters to me. And look, they, for the most part, were healthy. And you got another star playing next to you, and that team underachieved. I mean, that's a 49-win team. They don't even finish second in the East. I mean, that to me, major disappointment, and that's got to factor into it. I look at Boston, even as loaded as they were going into the season, and we all loved the additions, I still think they overachieved. I still think they surpassed expectations, despite the fact they were that loaded. Nobody's expecting a team to win 64 games in the NBA. There's a lot of parity. There's a lot of talent spread out around the league. Nobody expects a team to win 64 games, win a conference by 14 games. It's one of the biggest discrepancies we've ever had in this league. So I think that's what settled it for me. A team that actually surpassed really lofty expectations, and another team that had high expectations that really underperformed and underwhelmed. And that's ultimately what broke that tie.
I like that you weigh team success into this. I actually think people should. And look, the number one comment we got on the MVP conversation that we had earlier in this week was, you're overvaluing. It's only a handful of games. The standing, it's a better team, more players missed for this guy than that guy, or what have you. And I always say, there's no perfect science to quantifying an individual impact on the team. Right. But I think we make just as many mistakes when we try to weigh, well, his teammates weren't as good or this or that. I think we make as many mistakes in our logic doing that as we do when we just say, yeah, but if your team didn't win, you have to take some of the blame for that, even if logically it's not your fault. I just think we have to look at team success and weigh it really heavily. So you talked me in on the honest one. I would probably still have him on first team for my ballot, Brunson second team, but you made a very compelling argument. All right, let's go to second team.
Yeah, and look, real quick on that point, with all due respect, these people that do comment, social media, it's a great part of why social media exists. It's awesome to be able to interact with fans. I'm going to tell you right now, they're not watching as many games as I am. I guarantee you that. And also,
you're watching a lot of games.
And they see, you can't ever, and I don't even do this. You can't take the approach that your opinion is dead right when you're talking about players that are so close together. Yeah, and it's so hard. It's so subjective. So look, if you disagree, great, but be respectful in how you disagree. Well, that's great, man. That's a great point. But I would go this way, not, oh, you don't know what the hell you're talking about. It's like, come on, man. It's not that clear cut. And a lot of times, look, people have personal biases. They like players on their favorite teams. They like certain players on other teams. And so that weighs into it. I don't really have that. I don't really weigh So that's the one thing I will say. I'm completely unbiased as I can be. I don't do that at all. There's nothing that creeps into it for me. I don't have a favorite team. I don't have favorite players. I just go by what I see and the impact. So I just wanted to kind of follow up on that.
Yeah.
All right, let's get into the second team. Well, I already mentioned the one guy, Giannis.
Yeah.
He clearly is going to have a spot on here. The year that he had statistically would have been a first teamer if that team was up. I think 2 seed in the East is where they should have been based on those two guys being paired together, and they weren't. So that kept him off the first team, but clearly he goes in the second. I had another no-brainer on this team. Anthony Edwards, I think, is a second team for me. I got to put Anthony Edwards on there, man, with the year that Minnesota had. And again, they went a stretch there at the end of the year without Karl Anthony Towns, and yet they still battled, had a shot at the 1 seed all the way to the end of the season, in large part to Anthony Edwards. And again, 25 a game, whatever it is. He wouldn't be on this list, though, if this dude didn't compete the way that he does. He wants to win. He takes on challenges defensively. He's going to add more polish to his game, I think. And that's what's going to finally push him into and more team success when you're really a threat to win it, which I don't know that they are this year. That'll push him now into first team all league, an MVP type guy. He's not there yet, maybe a couple years down the road, but I think he deserves to be on second team. And then it's just, like I said, man, I'm going to take the next 3 names, easily could flip-flop them with 3 names off the third team. No question about it in my mind. But here's who I went with. I went with Jaylen Brown as one of my forwards on the second team.
Okay.
I'm going with Jaylen Brown, man. I think Jaylen Brown's last 2 months of this season were just about as good as any player in the Eastern Conference. He was incredible. And in fact, I don't even know what the number of game stretch. At one point, it was like a 25-30 game stretch where he outscored Jason Tatum. And the dude's an all league caliber defensive player. He flat out can lock people down defensively. I thought it was his best year. And again, I'm rewarding 64 wins, man. So I'm putting Jaylen Brown on there. The other 2 spots get a little bit tougher. I got one going to Kevin Durant. I think, look, Phoenix to me, clearly an underwhelming team. I agree. That's part of the argument I used against Giannis. Just look at Durant's year, man. I look how good this guy was. And some of this is the eye test in watching him in person and just going, there's just nothing quite like Kevin Durant, man. When he gets going, there's just nothing that quite looks like him when he gets going as a scorer. So I put him on there. And then the last spot, and people are going to probably lose their minds over this, I'm going with Tyrese Halliburton. I'm going to give him a second team spot, man. I think I look at that team, and I've been kind of secretly kind of praising them all year because they've been impressing me. Every time I watch them, I'm impressed. 47 wins. They're 3 back of the 2 seed. I mean, nobody expected Indiana to be 12 games over 500. They escaped the play-in. They don't have to worry about that. And just looking at their roster, the makeup of the roster, they added Siakam. That was a big addition at the All-Star, at the trading deadline. That team, they have one way to play, and they have one motor, and it's Tyrese Halliburton. None of that stuff works if Tyrese Halliburton doesn't play the way that he does, with the pace and with the vision. That all works because of him, and they're an offensive-minded team. That's how they're beating you. That's how they won 47 games, and he's the primary reason.
I like that one. You had a couple that surprised me, though. I had Halliburton a little bit later. Jaylen Brown is an interesting one because I could go back. I think you're right that the last 2 months have been so big for him. The Celtics, to me, are the toughest team. They get rewarded. Yeah. Like, I think Derek White even almost made an all-star game. There was a push for that. Guys get rewarded, but at the same time, they get handicapped because there's so many players on that roster that work. And this is one where Jaylen Brown, third team, I could see it happening. Second team, I was a little bit surprised. But that only sets up third team now. Your third team, because in taking Jaylen Brown, you bumped somebody off of who I had third team, and I'm so curious to find out which one it was.
Wait, say that again. So you're saying that there's somebody that I'm about to say, clearly, at least one name so far that you would have had on second team?
There's one player that's going to get bumped from third team, and I'm actually 2 players I think that'll get bumped from third team that I had on an All-NBA team that you did not. So what's your third team?
I'm putting LeBron James on there. I'm putting LeBron on third.
Fair.
Yeah, I'm putting LeBron on third team. And as much as people want to pile on the Lakers and everything, and they're such a polarizing team to talk about, bottom line is, it's still a 47-win team. Somehow, I feel like all we do is scrutinize the Lakers. They won 47 games. The West is loaded. He's still doing it at an incredibly high level. And when he is dialed in and he's really kind of locked in on being a very aggressive player, there's nothing in this league that stops him. He does what he wants, man. And you know what he does to make Anthony Davis's life easy and some of those other guys, because I don't love their roster. I love the top 2 players, and the rest of that roster, it's okay. But they won 47 games, and obviously they don't do that without LeBron the way he is now. So now, I thought that was an easy one for me. I don't know if you had him on second team, but I
had him third. I had him third.
Okay. Third team for me. Now it gets super interesting. I think I do have to reserve a spot on the third team for Tyrese Maxey. I'm putting Maxey on there. And look, I know they didn't have a great record when Embiid went out. So he's not. Right. I'm not saying he's a first team all league player. He's not an MVP guy. He clearly is not a guy that can carry that thing all by himself. But the guy had 3 50-point games this year. Okay, he had 3 50-point games, and he also like I was wondering if when Embiid went out, was like his personal production gonna really suffer? Like it was gonna tell me a lot if teams could just blitz him on every ball screen. Let's just make him absolutely the guy we target every night to take out. The guy still did his thing, man. He did his thing in a big way, and it didn't necessarily lead to wins because Embiid is such a unique force. Take that off any team. I don't care who's on the team. Take Joel Embiid off the floor on both ends of the court. You're going to have a hard time winning games. He wasn't really affected in the way that he played. So I just think Maxey gets a spot. And I have a list of I wrote extras, and I'm sure some of these guys, obviously, I could tell by your reaction would get your third team spot. All right, here we go. I put Sabonis on third team.
Okay.
I think, look, I'm looking at the bigs on my list, and all I've got is Jokic. And if you count Giannis as a big, but he's a forward, and Sabonis.
Yeah.
Is once Embiid went out, that's really all you got. So look, man, and there were some nights I felt like some of these triple double things, we were too wrapped up in it. Like, are these hollow numbers? I would think to myself sometimes. Truth is, when you watch them play, you watch how important his passing is to that team and the way they run their offense. And then he led the league in rebounding, right? The guy brings it every single night. He's the number 1 rebounder in the league and almost gave you 20 points a game as well. I'm putting Sabonis on there. Third team. I'm putting Steph Curry on third team.
Yeah.
I think that when you look at the Warriors, and they had a lot of dudes play below career norms, a lot. Klay Thompson, clearly. Wiggins, clearly. Chris Paul gave them nothing close to what they thought. Kuminga took an uptick. Draymond Green, all his issues, the suspensions and everything else. You look at all of that, and the Golden State Warriors still 46 wins. I mean, they're 3 wins behind Phoenix for being out of the play-in. With all of that going on, it's all because of Steph Curry. He's the guy that stirs the drink. I put Curry on there. And then my last spot, I'd put Kyrie Irving on there. I'd give Kyrie third team.
All right.
Sensational all year. And most importantly, available for the most part.
Yeah.
Locked in mentally, which is always the biggest concern for me with Kyrie. And totally comfortable next to Luka, living in that shadow and understanding his opportunities to thrive. And has become the perfect partner to Luka. And when they were paired together, I didn't know if that would ever happen. So I give Kyrie a lot of credit for that. And then he backs it up. He's got almost 26 a night. It's not like he's not contributing. The guy's lighting it up. So that's who I have. And then I have a list of 6 guys I wrote down that potentially could have been in this mix.
Well, I'm going to ask you about some of your decisions here. So you basically have Jokic and Sabonis as your bigs. You did not take Gobert, and you did not take Anthony Davis. So for me personally, I had Gobert third team, and I'm the world's biggest Gobert respecter for some reason. But to me, the impact he makes defensively is so huge, so enormous that I had to include them on there. And I know they fell to that 3 seed in the last week. But for me, Gobert belonged on this list just because when I watch different teams match up throughout the year, Gobert changes the game and changes the game plan every time. I think he's that good of a defender, especially in the regular season. And then Anthony Davis had a really great year. It's hard to give 2 Lakers players to give them 2 slots in this, given their position. But Anthony Davis has a strong case as well. So what about those 2 guys that you left off?
Well, the Lakers question first, Anthony Davis, is because of what you just said. You're going to put 2 guys on there from a team that's, barely survived the play-in. And we don't even know that yet, actually. 2 guys. And so you have to make a decision, in my opinion. Look, some people might make the argument that they think Anthony Davis is more valuable this year to the Lakers than LeBron. That's the question though. But to get two guys from a team that's in the play-in, very difficult to do. So that's why I picked LeBron. Now, the one regret I might have is the Gobert one. And I wrote him down, and I actually wrote Sabonis / Gobert.
Same.
That's basically what I did. And I just kept going back and forth. And I know that impact that Gobert has defensively and rebounding. I just, for me, some of it is responsibility. And he has almost none offensively, other than rim run and offensive rebound. To me, that's a huge part of being like a star NBA player, man, is handling the ball, passing the ball, scoring the ball, and doing it every night to give your team a chance to win. Like there were nights to Gobert, he could score 6 points. They were going to be just fine because other guys were going to do that. That's not necessarily the case with pretty much every other guy I listed. And I think that for me is what tipped it in Sabonis' favor. Look, and anybody flips out about that in Minnesota, I get it. You could be 100% right. It's subjective. And that might be the one thing when it's all said and done, I would question myself on back and forth ad nauseum because I wouldn't be able to necessarily think I got it right. Gobert deserves a spot on one of these teams.
And the only other guy that I think that I was surprised not to hear was Kawhi, unless I missed. Wish we went quickly over it. Nope. But Kawhi Leonard, I
wrote Kawhi in the extras list. He's in the extras list. He's in there. I don't know, man. I you know what hurt him relative to Kawhi Leonard previous seasons at his best.
Right.
I think that's what it was for me. Like. And it didn't start out that way. He was really good, really efficient, playing every night early in the year. Injuries started to get to him a little bit the second half of the year. He wasn't quite as dominant. I don't think their team, after hitting that one stretch where they were really hot and it looked like, man, this team on paper could win it all. They finished. They were 500 for the last 2 months of the season. Yeah, 500. It affected the way I think about Kawhi, I think. But I wrote him in that list along with some other names. Damian Lillard, I put down.
Can't do it.
I put Donovan Mitchell.
Yeah.
I put Jamal Murray's name down, although I wasn't thinking at the time about the 65 game limit, so that would disqualify him. But I'm just talking about in terms of significance and importance. If he had gotten 6 more games in, I think he deserves to be in the discussion. I had Anthony Davis written down. I had Devin Booker written down. And I had Paolo Banchero written down. Yeah, those are the other names. Those are the other names I had written down. So I think everybody that should be named has been named. Now, have fun with it out there. I don't think most people, if they're being real about this, and take your favoritism out of the equation, are going to argue that there's only 3 stone cold locks for first team, and then it's up for debate.
Then it gets tough. Then it gets really tough.
And so if it's that tough with first team, you can imagine how hard some of these choices are for second and third team. And then a lot of people's lists are going to look different. And I would be shocked, by the way, if when it all comes out and all the voting is the actual vote and these awards come out, I'm sure this is far from right. These top 3 teams, certainly second and third team, is just going to be a lot of difference of opinion because this is the hardest I've seen it in terms of the wins so tightly grouped together and like the statistics and impact so tightly grouped together. There was very little differentiation between those guys. So for me, that's when I look into the more nuanced things, responsibility that they have on a nightly basis for their team to operate the way they do. That played into it for me in a big way.
Well, that does it for Legs' all NBA picks. Let us know in the comments. We always see all the comments. So if you want to let us know who you would have picked for first team all NBA, or maybe if you really want to go deep and give us first, second, and third team, or just let us know who you think was a snub, and I'll throw one out to you to discuss in the comment section. Victor Wembanyama made my honorable mention list. He did not make the list, and I don't think he deserves it. But if this season was only the second half of the season, I think he would have made one of the lists. So sets himself up nicely. The reason I wanted to bring him up is sometimes you have to be in the discussion before you actually win an award. And he's in the discussion for me this year. But that does it for our All-NBA selection. Hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you never miss one of our shows. We'll see you on the other side.